The Holocene officially begins 11,700 years before the present, a boundary defined not by myth or tradition, but by hard physical evidence locked inside Greenland's ice. Layers extracted from projects like NGRIP and GRIP show a sudden and dramatic shift in oxygen isotopes, revealing an abrupt warming that ended a long era of climatic chaos. This moment did more than mark a new geological chapter. It closed the door on a world shaped by instability and opened a narrow window of balance that would quietly transform human history. For over 2.5 million years during the Pleistocene, Earth's climate behaved like a system constantly on edge. Temperatures swung violently. Ice sheets expanded and collapsed. Ecosystems advanced and retreated in pulses that unfolded over decades rather than millennia. Human survival depended on mobility, flexibility, and short-term adaptation. Nothing stayed predictable long enough to build upon. That pattern broke at the end of the Younger Dryas. Between roughly 12,900 and 11,700 years ago, the planet experienced a sudden return to near-glacial conditions, even as it had been warming after the last glacial maximum. In the North Atlantic region, temperatures plunged within a human lifetime. Forests stalled, grasslands withered, migration routes shifted. Human groups across Eurasia and the Near East were forced to adapt once again to shrinking resources and ecological stress. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to Primal Roots. Then, just as abruptly, it ended. Ice core records show that temperatures in Greenland rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in less than a century. In geological terms, this was nearly instantaneous. The cold snap released its grip, ocean circulation patterns reactivated, and the climate system flipped into a new mode. The Holocene had begun. This shift was closely tied to the recovery of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, a massive conveyor belt of ocean currents that redistributes heat across the planet. During the Younger Dryas, meltwater from the collapsing Laurentide ice sheet flooded the North Atlantic, weakening this circulation. When the freshwater input slowed, the system restarted, pulling warm water northward and stabilizing temperatures across much of the northern hemisphere. What followed was something rare in Earth's recent history: climatic restraint. The Holocene did not eliminate change, but it narrowed its limits. Temperature fluctuations became smaller. Seasonal cycles became more regular. Extreme reversals grew less frequent. Compared to the Pleistocene, the planet entered a phase of relative calm. This stability reshaped landscapes worldwide. Temperate forests expanded across Europe and North America, replacing tundra and cold steppe ecosystems. In northern Africa, regions that are deserts today experienced extended wet phases, filling basins with lakes and sustaining grasslands and wildlife. Fossil pollen, lake sediments, and ancient shorelines all point to a greener Sahara during the early Holocene. As global temperatures climbed, the remaining continental ice sheets continued to melt. Sea levels rose more than 60 meters between 11,700 and 7,000 years ago, flooding vast coastal plains. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the oceans. Doggerland, once a habitable land bridge connecting Britain to mainland Europe, was slowly submerged, fragmenting populations and reshaping migration routes. These environmental shifts unfolded alongside a quiet but decisive transformation in human behavior. By the start of the Holocene, Homo sapiens already occupied nearly every habitable region on Earth. What changed was not where humans lived, but how they related to their surroundings. The new climate allowed for longer planning horizons. Resources became more predictable. Seasonal patterns stabilized enough for people to return to the same places year after year. Large Ice Age animals were disappearing. Some vanished due to hunting pressure, others because their habitats collapsed as climates warmed. Mammoths lingered in isolated pockets of Siberia until around 4,000 years ago, But across most of the world, megafauna populations had already declined. Human groups adapted by broadening their diets and intensifying the use of plants, small animals, and aquatic resources. In the Fertile Crescent, this shift became especially visible. Communities began experimenting with the cultivation of wild cereals like wheat and barley between 10,500 and 9,500 years ago. Archaeological sites such as Jericho, Göbekli Tepe, and Chayonu preserve the material traces of this transition: grinding stones, storage pits, and increasingly permanent architecture. Agriculture did not appear overnight, nor was it inevitable. The Holocene did not force humans to farm. It simply removed enough environmental volatility to make long-term investment worthwhile. Similar processes unfolded independently elsewhere. Rice cultivation emerged in the Yangtze River basin. Millet was domesticated in northern China. In Mesoamerica, maize evolved gradually from teosinte through centuries of selective use. This global convergence tells a deeper story. The Holocene created a shared ecological context, even as cultures followed distinct paths. Stability acted as a catalyst, not a script. From a geological perspective, the Holocene is an interglacial, but it differs from earlier ones in a crucial way. It coincided with the rise of a single species capable of reshaping ecosystems intentionally. Early human impacts were subtle but detectable. Sediment layers show increased charcoal from controlled burning. Pollen records reveal shifts in vegetation linked to land management rather than climate alone. The planet was no longer changing in isolation. Feedback loops between climate, biology, and human behavior had begun. Multiple lines of evidence support this reconstruction: ice cores, radiocarbon dating, fossil pollen, ancient DNA, and archaeological stratigraphy. Together they reveal the Holocene not as a passive backdrop, but as a turning point in the Earth system. The essential condition was balance, not permanence, not perfection, but a rare equilibrium. A climate stable enough to allow memory, planning, and accumulation. Within that narrow window, humans began to settle, experiment, and transform their relationship with the world. What followed would reshape the planet itself. As the Holocene unfolded through its first millennia, the relationship between humans and the environment entered a phase unlike anything that had come before. The violent climatic swings that had defined the late Pleistocene faded into the background. In their place emerged a world governed by slower rhythms, longer cycles, and a degree of predictability that fundamentally altered how survival strategies were shaped. The planet did not become static, but its volatility decreased enough to allow continuity. That continuity changed everything. Paleoclimate records show that between roughly 11,000 and 80,200 years before present, global temperatures remained relatively warm and stable. This interval was not perfectly uniform, but disruptions were limited in scale and duration. One notable exception was the 8.2 kiloyear event, a brief cooling episode triggered by the sudden release of meltwater from glacial lakes in North America into the North Atlantic. Ice cores from Greenland and marine sediments confirm a temporary drop in temperatures, yet even this disturbance was modest compared to the abrupt climate shocks of the Ice Age. The system recovered quickly, reinforcing a broader pattern of resilience. This new environmental reliability had direct consequences for human behavior. Across multiple regions, archaeological layers from the early Holocene become thicker, richer, and more complex. Sites show longer occupation spans, repeated rebuilding, and an increasing density of material remains. Humans were no longer passing through landscapes. They were staying. River valleys, floodplains, and emerging coastlines became focal points of settlement. These environments offered water, fertile soils, diverse food sources, and predictable seasonal cycles. Population densities increased, not explosively, but steadily. Over time, this concentration of people encouraged new forms of social organization, resource management, and technological specialization. In the Levant, communities associated with the Natufian cultural tradition had already shown early tendencies towards semi-sedentary life before the formal start of the Holocene. However, after 11,700 years ago, these tendencies solidified. Excavations at sites such as Ain Malaha, Jericho, and Abu Huraira reveal permanent structures, storage facilities, and shifts in diet detectable through isotopic analysis of human remains. Plant foods became increasingly central, while reliance on large game declined. These changes were not limited to one region. In East Asia, early Holocene layers in the Yangtze River basin preserve evidence of rice domestication dating back roughly 9,000 years. Waterlogged sites like Hemudu and Pengtushan have yielded preserved wooden tools, paddies, and plant remains, offering rare insight into early agricultural experimentation. Further north in the Yellow River basin, millet cultivation followed a parallel trajectory, supported by archaeobotanical evidence and microfossil analysis. In the Americas, the disappearance of Ice Age megafauna forced a reorganization of subsistence strategies. By around 10,000 years ago, most large mammals had vanished from the landscape. Human groups adapted by intensifying plant use and diversifying their diets. In central Mexico, genetic studies and starch grain analysis show that teosinte was gradually transformed into maize beginning around 9,000 years ago. This was not a single innovation, but a long process of selection, management, and cultural transmission. In the Andes, high-altitude environments became centers for the domestication of potatoes and quinoa, demonstrating how Holocene stability allowed humans to exploit even marginal ecological niches. Agriculture, however, was not a universal or immediate solution. Many societies continued to rely on mixed strategies, blending foraging, hunting, fishing, and small-scale cultivation. Archaeological and ethnographic data suggest that flexibility, not specialization, was the dominant adaptive strategy during the early Holocene. Farming emerged where it was advantageous, not because it was inherently superior. Alongside economic change came social transformation. Longer residence in a single location encouraged deeper attachments to place, ancestry, and territory. Burials became more elaborate and more frequent. Architecture grew increasingly durable. Symbolic objects appeared in greater numbers, reflecting evolving belief systems and social identities. One of the most striking examples of early Holocene social complexity is Göbekli Tepe, located in southeastern Anatolia. Dating to between 9,600 and 8,200 years ago, the site features massive limestone pillars, arranged in circular enclosures and decorated with detailed animal reliefs. Notably, there is little evidence for intensive agriculture at the site itself. This challenges older assumptions that food production was a prerequisite for complex social organization. Instead, it suggests that cooperation, ritual, and shared symbolic systems may have emerged first, helping to coordinate larger groups and later support economic transformation. Cognitive and cultural evolution were also shaped by the new environmental context. The relative predictability of the Holocene favored long-term planning, detailed spatial memory, and cumulative cultural transmission. Skills, techniques, and knowledge could be refined and passed down across generations without being constantly erased by environmental collapse. Technologies became more specialized. Regional traditions grew more distinct. Culture began to accumulate at an accelerating pace. Biology responded as well. Changes in diet altered selective pressures on human populations. Genetic studies using ancient DNA reveal that traits such as lactase persistence, which allows adults to digest milk, began spreading in certain populations after the adoption of pastoralism, particularly in Europe and parts of Africa after about 7,500 years ago. Variants associated with starch metabolism also increased in frequency among agricultural populations. These adaptations did not arise randomly. They were shaped by the new ecological niches humans created for themselves. Humans were not passive beneficiaries of Holocene conditions. They actively reshaped ecosystems. Sedimentary records from multiple continents show rising levels of charcoal after 10,000 years ago, indicating widespread use of fire for land management. Controlled burning altered vegetation patterns, encouraged the growth of certain plant species, and influenced animal populations. This early form of environmental engineering appears in Australia, the Americas, and Africa, pointing to a globally distributed practice rather than an isolated innovation. As populations expanded, interaction between distant groups intensified. Long-distance exchange networks became increasingly visible in the archaeological record. Obsidian from Anatolia traveled hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells appeared far inland. Pigments and rare minerals circulated across vast regions. Geochemical fingerprinting allows these materials to be traced back to their sources, revealing networks of contact that transmitted not only goods, but ideas, techniques, and social norms. Greater population density also brought new challenges. Skeletal evidence from early agricultural communities shows signs of nutritional stress, repetitive labor, and emerging disease patterns. Diets became more carbohydrate-heavy and less diverse. Living in closer quarters increased exposure to pathogens, even if large-scale epidemics would only appear much later. The Holocene offered opportunity, but it also introduced trade-offs that reshaped human health and resilience. The strength of the scientific understanding of this period lies in its interdisciplinary foundation. Archaeology, genetics, geology, and climate science converge to reveal a coherent picture of early Holocene dynamics. Institutions across the world have contributed to refining this timeline, allowing increasingly precise reconstructions of how environmental stability intersected with human innovation. The Holocene was not merely a calm interval following chaos. It actively restructured the feedback loops between climate, ecosystems, and human societies. Stability enabled experimentation. Experimentation led to transformation. And transformation, once underway, began to accumulate momentum. By the end of the early Holocene, humanity was no longer simply adapting to the planet. It had begun slowly but decisively to change it. As the Holocene moved beyond its early millennia, the changes initiated by climatic stability began to compound. By around 6,000 years before present, global sea levels had largely reached their modern range, continental ice sheets had nearly vanished, and the major biomes of the planet had settled into configurations broadly recognizable today. This phase, often described as the Middle Holocene, combined relative climatic balance with a rapid expansion of human influence across land, water, and biological systems. Paleoclimate evidence from cave formations, marine sediments, and tree rings indicates that between roughly 9,000 and 5,000 years ago, many regions experienced conditions warmer and in some cases wetter than those of the present. These shifts were not uniform, but they created extended periods of ecological productivity. Nowhere was this more evident than in northern Africa. During the African humid period, the Sahara transformed into a mosaic of lakes, rivers, grasslands, and savanna. Rock art, fish remains, and settlement traces preserved deep within today's desert document landscapes capable of supporting both wildlife and dense human populations. This favorable phase did not last indefinitely. Gradual changes in Earth's orbital geometry altered the distribution of solar radiation reducing summer monsoon strength in the northern hemisphere. Beginning around 5,900 years ago, aridification intensified across northern Africa and parts of the Middle East. The transformation of the Sahara from a green landscape into a desert unfolded over centuries rather than decades, but its consequences were profound. As water sources vanished, human groups migrated toward more reliable environments, especially river valleys and coastal zones. These movements contributed directly to the concentration of populations in regions such as the Nile Valley, the Tigris-Euphrates Basin, the Indus floodplain, and the Yellow River system. In these settings, agriculture, irrigation, and permanent settlement expanded rapidly. By approximately 5,500 years ago, farming communities along the Nile had developed increasingly complex social structures, culminating in the emergence of early dynastic states by around 3100 BCE. In Mesopotamia, cities like Uruk and Ur rose between 5,300 and 4,800 years ago, supported by large-scale irrigation systems that reshaped alluvial plains into intensively managed landscapes. These societies did not merely respond to Holocene conditions, they actively modified them. Land clearance accelerated, wetlands were drained, river courses were altered. Archaeological and palynological records from Europe, Asia, and the Near East show sharp declines in arboreal pollen after about 6,000 years ago, signaling widespread deforestation. At the same time, sediment cores reveal increased erosion, as soils exposed by cultivation were carried into rivers and deltas. By the late Holocene, human activity had become a significant force within regional ecosystems. Domesticated plants and animals spread far beyond their original centers of origin. Wheat and barley moved across Europe and into South Asia. Rice cultivation expanded throughout East and Southeast Asia. Maize traveled from Mesoamerica into North and South America. Livestock such as cattle, sheep, and pigs accompanied human migrations, reshaping grasslands and forests through grazing pressure. These processes altered biological diversity on a global scale. Selection under domestication changed the genomes of plants and animals, while habitat modification favored some species over others. The result was a gradual homogenization of ecosystems, with human-managed landscapes replacing wild ones across vast areas. This transformation is clearly visible in genetic, archaeological, and ecological records. The late Holocene was not climatically uniform. After around 4,200 years ago, increased regional variability became evident. One of the most studied episodes of this period is the 4.2 kiloyear event, marked by prolonged droughts across much of the northern hemisphere. Evidence from ice cores, lake sediments, and archaeological sequences links this climatic stress to major social disruptions. The decline of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, the end of Egypt's Old Kingdom, and transformations in the Indus Valley all occurred within this interval. These cases demonstrate that even within a generally stable epoch, societies remained vulnerable when environmental pressures exceeded adaptive capacity. The key distinction between the Holocene and earlier periods lies not in the absence of disruption, but in its tempo. Environmental changes unfolded over decades or centuries, allowing for cultural responses such as migration, technological innovation, or social reorganization. Yet complexity itself introduced fragility. Large populations, centralized systems, and intensive land use reduced flexibility. When conditions shifted beyond certain thresholds, collapse became possible. Biological consequences continued to accumulate. Mining and early metallurgy left measurable traces in sediments. From the Bronze Age onward, concentrations of metals such as copper and lead increased in peat bogs and ice layers, reflecting atmospheric pollution long before modern industry. Roman-era mining operations, in particular, produced detectable spikes in lead deposition across Europe. These long-term signals feed into a modern scientific debate over whether the Holocene has given way to a new geological epoch, often referred to as the Anthropocene. Some researchers argue that human-driven changes in atmospheric chemistry, biodiversity, and sedimentation have surpassed natural variability. Others maintain that the Holocene framework remains valid, emphasizing continuity rather than rupture. Regardless of terminology, the evidence shows that human influence became globally significant during the later stages of the Holocene. Ice core data from Antarctica and Greenland reveal that, over the last 2 centuries, concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane have exceeded the upper limits observed throughout the entire Holocene. These values fall well outside the range that supported the stable conditions under which human civilizations developed. In this context, the Holocene appears less like a permanent state and more like a rare interval with defined boundaries. Throughout the Holocene, Earth functioned as an interconnected system. Atmospheric circulation influenced rainfall, oceans regulated temperature, vegetation affected carbon storage. Human societies, increasingly embedded within these feedback loops, amplified some processes while suppressing others. The history of the Holocene cannot be separated from the history of human expansion, innovation, and impact. Seen as a whole, the Holocene represents a delicate balance rather than a guaranteed norm. Its stability allowed agriculture, cities, science, and technology to emerge, yet that same success placed growing pressure on the environmental systems that sustained it. The geological record makes clear that equilibrium was never permanent, only temporarily maintained. Understanding the Holocene in its entirety, from its abrupt beginning to its cumulative consequences, offers more than a reconstruction of the past. It reveals how narrow the conditions for large-scale civilization truly are. The window that opened 11,700 years ago enabled unprecedented human development, but it was always finite. The Holocene stands as a reminder that planetary stability is neither automatic nor assured. It is a phase shaped by interactions between climate, life, and culture, one whose lessons extend directly into the present. If this deep dive expanded your view of human history and planetary balance, subscribe and share. Science like this deserves to travel further.